Envoy of Lights presents Lopsided Minds, Part 5, When Reason Falters. Written and spoken by Dr. Sean Shamaradian.
In the name of the omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, omnitemporal, and omniscient God, the most merciful, the most gracious, and the most compassionate, the eminence, the proprietor of patient, space, time, and beyond, the fiduciary, the adjudicator, custodian, and the high judge, the umpire of all there is and the non-existence, the holder of the truth, justice, and equity in the name of the Almighty God. Civilization crumbles and decays when it forgets what gave it reason to rise. Bear in mind that the universe is not mute. It speaks in laws, in numbers, in form and geometry, in consciousness, in beauty, in constants that demand steadiness, intelligence, and in the stubborn fact that something exists at all. Matter does not explain mind. Chaos does not explain order, and survival does not explain meaning. Everything that attempts to erase God borrows his tools: logic, morality, truth, to deny God. The traces of God are everywhere, not because God hides them, but because the atheists have trained themselves to live, not to see them. Positivist philosophy. Positivism is a philosophy that asserts that genuine knowledge derives solely from empirical evidence, sensory experience, and logical and mathematical reasoning, rejecting metaphysics, speculation, and faith as sources of truth, and advocating the scientific method for understanding both the natural and social worlds. Founded by Auguste Comte, it posits that societies progress through the logical, metaphysical, and finally positive or scientific stages, in which understanding the laws governing phenomena leads to societal improvement. It emphasizes observation, data, and objective, verifiable facts, applying scientific rigor, including sociology. The core principle is that knowledge is derived from sensory experience and observation. Rejection of metaphysics, since to them traditional philosophical questions about ultimate reality should be rejected as God or the soul are meaningless because they cannot be empirically verified or tested. Auguste Comte, 1798 to 1857, the father of positivism and sociology, outlined three stages of human thought: theological, metaphysical, and positive. Logical, positivism, Vienna Circle, a later development that combined positivism with formal logic, focused on verifying statements through observation. What is wrong with the positivist philosophy? The claim is self-refuting, since saying only what is empirically verifiable is meaningful is not itself empirically verifiable by its own rule. Positivism fails. Eliminates metaphysics by decree, command order, not argument. It dismisses God, morality, meaning, and purpose a priori, not because they are false, but because its method cannot measure them. A priori refers to knowledge, reasoning, or assumptions made before or without direct experience, observation, or data, relying on logic, general principles, or existing understanding to deduce specific conclusions. Positivism cannot justify science itself. Scientific laws rely on induction, causality, and uniformity of nature, none of which are empirically provable. They forget that many absolute truths are non-measurable, such as logic, mathematics, ethics, consciousness, mind, subconscious, memories, love, justice, trust, sacrifice, loyalty, talent, ingenuity, truth, intention, aspiration, desire, accountability, IQ, courage, prayers, hope, mercy, kindness, empathy, devotion, imagination, dreams, creativity, human senses, human dignity, hate, greed, jealousy, anger, and thousands of other things not manufactured, but planted in nature that make living possible, forgets that mind, intelligence, memory, intention, and interpretation are central to knowledge. Human experience, history, art, faith, culture, and the universe cannot be reduced to laboratory-style verification. It collapses because its verification principle is untenable, not defensible. It reduces truth to a test tube. Existentialism, Renaissance materialism, 16th to 17th century, contemporary physicalism, and new atheism. Existentialism. Existentialism argues that existence precedes essence, meaning human beings are born without inherent purpose and must create their own meaning through choices and actions in a world that is inherently meaningless or absurd. Regarding God, many existentialists, like Sartre, are atheists or see God's absence as the source of our radical freedom, creating no good a priori and the burden of responsibility. In contrast, others, such as Kierkegaard, are Christian existentialists who focus on individual faith and subjective meaning, including in relation to God. You are born a blank slate, not with a predefined nature or purpose essence. You become who you are through your life's journey. Because there is no divine plan, you are condemned to be free, completely responsible for your choices, values, and meaning. They often embrace the death of God, seeing God's absence as essential for human freedom and self-creation. Life has no inherent meaning. God's absence removes any external moral compass or preordained purpose, thereby forcing humans to invent one. Meaning is found in the personal, often anxious leap of faith and the individual existential quest for God, not in a universally dictated plan or in a divine being. What is wrong with existentialism? First, groundless meaning. It claims life has no inherent meaning, only self-created meaning. But subjective meaning collapses under suffering, death, or absurdity, preposterousness, idiocy. A meaning that ends at death is not meaning, it is a distraction. Existentialists deny objective values, yet speak of authenticity, responsibility, courage, and freedom. These presuppose objective moral standards. They emphasize freedom without foundation, since freedom is exalted as ultimate. But if humans are products of blind matter and chance, then freedom is an illusion, and choices are biochemical inevitability. They assert freedom, but deny its metaphysical source. They believe in moral relativism, disguised as heroism. Create your own values, no moral obligation, no moral accountability. Because without God, there is no final authority or judgment. This reduces ethics to personal preferences, cloaked in poetic language. They fiercely defend human dignity and worth. But if humans are accidental matter, dignity has no ontological basis. Rights are social invention, not truth. Existentialists stress radical responsibilities, yet deny final judgment and transcendent moral laws. The utterance is to be authentic. But authentic to what? By what standard? Without God, authenticity is self-referential emptiness, referring oneself or one's attributes, characteristics, or actions. They claim humans have no given nature, but humans share rationality, moral intuition, desire for meaning, peace, and tranquility, and so on. They claim that humans are born with a clean slate and will mold themselves throughout life's journey. As true as that is, they reject the claim that human beings are potentiated to behave intelligently and intentionally, heightened to grow with wisdom, with will, and the freedom to choose. Yes, they are born with a clean slate. Still, they do not act like beasts with instinct, like a turtle that walks to the water as soon as it is born, or a frog that jumps into a pond when it is born, or a tiger, or a lion, or an eagle looking for prey by instinct, and so on. Existentialism emerged in the mid-20th century, influenced by thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Nietzsche, Simone de Beauvoir, and others, and is often characterized as replacing humans with God. They argue God does not exist, therefore there is no essence, purpose, or moral law. Existence precedes essence, meaning humans exist first, then create their own meaning, including faith or God. Humans are not born with predefined meaning or purpose. But if it had been otherwise, we would all behave identically, pre-programmed to do the same and even robotic. It is a heavenly attribute that we are endowed with a brain that can grow unboundedly, to grow differently, diverse, fired in intelligence, ingenuity, creativity, IQ, talent, inspiration, experience, and unlimited other things, making us who we are, to one day kneel to God, as God manifested His image, giving us the freedom to be who we want to be. They are putting the horse in front of the cart. Humans become the source of meaning. Humans become the lawgiver. Humans become the judge of good and evil. What God once provided, value, moral authority, and purpose, is now assigned to individual will. Bear in mind that Darwinist survival of the fittest. It influenced existentialist philosophy, but indirectly. No wonder genocide escalated, since moral and ethical behavior became a personal choice. Darwinism did not create existentialism, but it helped dissolve the metaphysical ground on which earlier philosophers stood. It is no secret that existentialism has had a subtle but powerful influence on the modern movie industry, particularly in superhero films such as Superman, Superwoman, Batman, and their darker reboots. The influence is not a philosophical view, but a shift in worldview, moral structure, and the meaning of heroism, which I am afraid we should not be proud of, as the movie industry has in practice left more ills than goods. Existentialist core ideas absorbed by cinema, no given meaning, as meaning must be created. God or absolute morality is absent or silent. Radical freedom. Humans define themselves by choices. Responsibility without transcendence. Alienation. The hero is isolated and misunderstood. Authenticity over obedience. These notions gradually replaced older mythic theological models of heroes. Pre-existentialism, 1938 to 1970s, pre-existential/mythic hero. Moral law is objective. Superman serves truth, justice, and order. Power is restrained by duty. Heroism equals the protection of the weak. Evil is real and recognized. Modern Superman, post-1980s, existential reinterpretation. Why should I save them? Who decides what is right? My power entitles me to define morality. Humanity is ambivalent, even disposable. God-like power with no higher authority. A being above moral constraint. A lonely God creating meaning through will. Modern superwoman narratives often reflect an existentialist conception of woman influenced by Simone de Beauvoir, a feminist existentialist, believing that identity is constructed, not given. Traditional roles are rejected. Moral authority comes from self-definition. Power legitimizes autonomy. Duty to transcend the norms, resulting in heroism becoming self-fulfillment. Moral struggle becomes identity struggle. Villains are frequently systems or ideas, not moral evils. It replaces God with human will, power, and authentic choice. The modern superhero films often feature messianic imagery without God, salvation without repentance, judgment without mercy, power without accountability. The hero becomes the meaning of the world because meaning does not exist. Therefore, heroes kill. Collateral damage is normalized. The ends justify the means. I decide what is right. Strength substitutes for wisdom. Cynicism toward humanity. Humanity is portrayed as unworthy. The hero is superior but detached. This resonates with people because modern audiences feel abandoned by institutions. Distrust absolute moral claims. Experience identity confusion. Fear meaninglessness. If no God saves us, maybe a God-like human will. Criticism of this rather ill shift. Power without transcendent morality leads to tyranny. Meaning invented by force collapses into nihilism. Heroes without accountability. Ability to become anti-heroes. Salvation without truth becomes spectacle. As Dostoevsky warned, if God does not exist, everything is permissible. Renaissance materialism, 16th to 17th century. Renaissance materialism denotes a cluster of ideas that emerged in Europe during the 15th to 17th centuries, during the Renaissance and the early scientific revolution, emphasizing matter, nature, and physical causation over purely spiritual or metaphysical explanations of reality. It was not a single unified doctrine, but a shift in worldview away from medieval scholasticism. Core idea. At its heart, Renaissance materialism holds that Reality is fundamentally composed of matter in motion, governed by natural laws, and can be understood without appealing to divine or spiritual causes. This marked a significant departure from the medieval view in which God, final causes, and immaterial forms were central to explaining nature. Key feature: rejection of scholastic meaning, academic, metaphysics. Medieval Aristotelianism emphasized final causes, purpose, forms and essence, divine theology. Renaissance materialism reduces explanation to efficient causes, mechanical forces, matter and motion, inspired by the atomists Democritus, Epicurus, and Lucretius. No intrinsic purpose in nature. Nature is seen as a machine, not excluding human beings. Living organisms are described as mechanisms, influenced later thinkers such as Descartes in physics and Hobbes. Autonomy of nature according to self-sufficient laws. God, if acknowledged, becomes a distant architect rather than an active sustainer. Early modern figures such as Niccolò Machiavelli believed that human nature could be explained pragmatically rather than morally. Giordano Bruno, Infinite Universe, Diminished Certainty of God. Pierre Gassendi, Atomism Without Aristotelian Forms. Thomas Hobbes, Humans as Material Bodies in Motion. Francis Bacon, Knowledge Through Empirical Mastery of Nature. Major criticism of Renaissance materialism. By rejecting purpose in nature, materialism cannot explain. Meaning, moral order, human intentionality. If everything is merely matter in motion, purpose itself becomes an illusion, since any constructively and orderly motion must serve a duty, a purpose. Humans reduced to biological machines. Consciousness becomes the byproduct of matter, which matter they do not know, solid, gas, liquid, or vapor, but matter is destructible, not reliable. It is localized and not cosmically prevalent, irrelevant to free will, and is not self-aware, fails to explain moral responsibility or any accountability or trust. If nature has no moral structure, ethics becomes subjective, bound to power, replacing value and virtue. Bear in mind that materialist assumptions later fed social Darwinism, technocratic dehumanization, ideologies that treat human beings as expendable units, often less than animals. If thoughts are only material reactions, why trust reason itself? Rationality becomes a chemical event rather than a truth-tracking faculty, prosperity schooling. Nature stripped of meaning, beauty, and sacredness. The cosmos becomes a cold, mechanistic force, leading to existential alienation. Max Weber later called it disenchantment, disappointment with the world. God is reduced to a distant clockmaker or a useless hypothesis. They undermine providence, miracles, and prayers. From a theistic perspective, Renaissance materialism does not disprove God. It redefines reality so God becomes unnecessary. They replace a purpose-filled, God-centered cosmos with a matter-driven, mechanistic universe, gaining scientific power but losing metaphysical, moral, and existential depth. Contemporary physicalism and new atheism. Contemporary physicalism encompasses several theories about the nature of reality, all of which generally imply that everything is physical or supervenes on the physical. This view broadly insinuates the non-material God by denying the existence of non-physical entities. It is a form of monism, asserting that the only existing substance is physical. Reductive physicalism proponents argue that seemingly non-physical phenomena, such as mental states, can be entirely reduced to or explained by physical products and processes such as brain states. Non-reductive physicalism. This view holds that while everything is fundamentally physical and supervenes on the physical, some properties such as consciousness are not simply reducible to low-level physical explanations. The physicalists seek to separate the fundamental realities of existence into micro-level entities, for example, quarks, electrons, photons, and fields and forces, for example, electromagnetism, strong and weak atomic forces, gravity, the laws of physics, quantum mechanics, relativity, and thermodynamics, by seeing the arrangement, the orderly situated atoms in different entities. For example, a smartphone at its lowest level consists of atoms arranged in a lattice and electrons moving through semiconductors. Electromagnetic interactions enable circuits, quantum effects in transistors. At this level, no interference is made to purpose, meaning, or function. Physicalists claim that if you had low-level physical information, you would in principle have a complete explanation of the product. High-level explanation conveyed the same object using functions, structures, patterns, systems, and purposes. Instrumental, not intrinsic. For instance, smartphones are, at a high level, communication devices, tools for information processing, social connectors, cameras, maps, and payment systems. At this level, we discuss software, design, use, and intent, believing the language is not particle-based but organizational. Accepting that high-level properties are real, but they are dependent on and realized by low-level physical states. This is often referred to as multiple realization, same function, different physical bases. They believe there can be no change at the high level without a change at the low physical level. Physicalists claim that all reality is ultimately physical matter and governed by the laws of physics, that mind, consciousness, reason, and meaning are nothing more than byproducts of bodily processes, rejecting God. Materialists, physicalists, naturalists, and other affiliates can describe brain processes but cannot explain subjective experience. Qualia. Why do neurons fire when feeling pain, love, depression, stress, excitement, etc.? Why not neurons firing without a pause, exuding hormones, not to exclude the sleeping hormones, happy and sad hormones, fight or flight hormones, releasing chemicals continuously so that we can laugh all the time, love all the time, sleep all the time, or stressed and depressed all the times, suicidal all the times or homicidal, vengeful, hungry, or full all the time, exhausted or vibrant all the time, and unforgiving with no kindness or any compassion, and thousands of other things. Why not? It is because precisely everything operating down to the tiniest level, to the subatomic level, and waves of our being are aware, since the whole is made of the sum of its parts. The physicalists can categorize or differentiate as they like, but the truth cannot be messed with. It only shames the beholder when one dilutes the facts. Why consciousness at all? Why? A neuron firing is specifically related to a particular need. It is not about London, China, the US, or Canada, justice, God, or yesterday. They know precisely why they are being fired. The physicalists do not realize that physical objects have no inherent meaning. They do not act on the basis of behavior. They do not act as they wish. There is precise instruction, planning, advising them when to activate and when not. Meaning, reference, truth, pain and suffering, hope and ingenuity, talent and creativity, IQ, inspiring, responsibility, trust and loyalty, intent and preservation, courage and sacrifice, sympathy, empathy, caring and kindness, compassion, and hundreds of other things that we every day live by cannot be devoted to dull, not intelligent, insensitive, and destructible materialism or physicalism. Physicalists and their affiliates proudly assert that the brain is matter or physical. It seems they are in a deja vu. If thoughts are chemical events, then they do not bear truth. They are chemical products that will disappear, not to be retrieved again. If physicalism is true, all thoughts are the result of blind physical causes. Beliefs are held because they facilitate survival. If reasoning is a product of the mind, a byproduct of consciousness, then how did physicalists mold and attain their theory of physicalism? Because no physical entity, no material entity without a mind exhausted of intelligence has any sense to derive, to make any sense. This should be self-defeating to physicalists. If minds are tuned for survival only, not the truth, why trust science or logic at all? Why is there reason to reach a just conclusion or arrive at equity and fairness? Physicalism implies determinism or randomness. If determined, then one cannot choose otherwise. If random, then one's choices are accidental. Moral responsibility collapses. Praise, blame, punishment, rewards, and guilt are illustrated as fictional. Yet human societies presuppose real agencies. Physicalism borrows moral language that it cannot justify. For physicalists, objective morality has no basis. If there is no God and solely matter exists, good and evil reduce to preferences or social conditions. Moral obligation becomes biological impulses, but human beings experience moral truth as binding, universal, independent of opinion. The physicalist should know that. Logic, laws of nature, mathematics, geometry, numbers, intention and purpose, and millions of other phenomena are non-physical. Yet science presupposes all of that and more, as if in a dream. Physicalism employs non-physical tools and agendas, but has no choice but to use them while denying their existence. If you are the same collection of particles, why, a big why, are you the same person from childhood to now? Only become wiser and mature as you grow up. What grounds or holds the continuity of self. No arrangement of atoms explains. First, person identity, the unity of experience. Matter changes constantly. The I does not dissolve with it. What is the secrecy? If physicalism is true, then there is no ultimate purpose, no final explanation, and no intrinsic value. Yet humans seek meaning, sacrifice, and act as if life matters. By the way, if we are all physical, why donate a kidney to a stranger in need, about to die if not cured? Donate possible organs to loved ones. Why die in the line of duty? A firefighter rescuing an elderly or a disabled person, a cat or a dog, and lose their life? Why cover a bomb or a hand grenade and disintegrate into pieces, saving many innocent lives? Why be good at all? Why a good Samaritan? Since humans sacrifice for the truth, for the innocents. Why laws exist? Why the universe is intelligent, and why there is something rather than nothing. Appeals to chance or brute fact are not explanations, they are admission of failure. The atheists act as if God were a molecule among molecules. They fail to account for conscious experience, meaning and intentionality, rational trust in reason, free will and accountability, objective morality, logic and mathematics, personal identity, purpose and value. Why does anything exist? Why reality is intelligible? Why be self-aware? The materialists, including physicalists, behave as if comatose, as if unconscious of robust, wholesome interactivity between the invisible and what is apparently noticed in our world with the naked eye, rather than through discernment, insight, acumen, and astuteness. They need to understand that science, logic, and physicalism itself depend on the reliability of human reason. To realize that molecules do not reason, they follow instructions. They are dependent on a master mind. Neurons do not pursue truth. Chemistry has no concern for validity. Survival does not equal truth. Logic and inference are non-physical. Mathematics, numbers, form, and geometry are not material. Consciousness is irreducible. Moral reasoning is insightful. It is not materially oriented. Physicalism borrows the ontological foundational attributes and then denies them. The moment the mind is lessened to matter, reason loses its authority. Neurons fire, but they do not judge truth. If our deepest convictions are the accidental outcome of blind forces, then even the conviction that God does not exist is nothing more than a neurological twitch. Physicalism, in denying God, is sawing off the branch they are sitting on. Physicalism claims the mind is just the brain. Consciousness emerges from neural complexity, but they ought to realize that emergence explains when something appears, not what it is. For example, wetness emerges from H2O, but wetness is still physical. Consciousness is not physical in kind. It has subjective experience, meaning, and truth value, none of which exist in physical. Physicalists believe that thoughts are brain states. but brain states have mass, charge, and location. Thoughts have aboutness, truth, and intentionality. No physical description contains the concept of anything. Physicalism holds that evolution shaped our minds to reason, but evolution shaped behaviors for survival, not beliefs for truth. A false belief that helps survive is favored over a genuine belief that does not. Hence, evolution yields useful delusions rather than reliable truth. If science works, it must indicate that our mind is reliable. If physicalism is true, then all beliefs are the result of non-rational causes. If beliefs are not formed because they are true, then we have no reason to trust them as reliable. Trust in rational belief is required for science, logic, and physicalism itself. Physicalism is epistemologically self-defeating. Logically, that reason cannot emerge from non-reason and still be authoritative. Alvin Plantinga, Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, Physicalism. The probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable, given naturalism and evolution, is low or inscrutable. If naturalism, physicalism, or materialism is true, then rational confidence collapses. Thomas Nagel, atheist philosopher, stated, "Materialism is false. The mental cannot be fully explained in physical terms." Nagel openly admits that consciousness, reason, information, and value do not fit inside a material framework. David Chalmers stated, "Consciousness poses the most complex problem for physicalism." For instance, liquidity emerges from molecules that remain physical. Consciousness emerges from neurons, not physical matter. Subjective experience, meaning, and normativity are categorically different. God is not invoked to explain lightning, disease, or brain chemistry. God explains why laws exist, why reason maps reality, and why consciousness exists, why truth and goodness are absolute. Science explains how things behave. God explains why anything exists to behave as it does. Matter can move, but it cannot mean, and a universe without meaning and purpose cannot justify truth. Physicalism reduces the mind to matter and then asks that matter to justify truth. It strips reason of authority, morality, obligation, and a consciousness of reality, yet continues to speak of truth, ethics, and meaning as though nothing had been lost. In rejecting God, physicalism does not become more rational. It becomes parasitic on the very realities it denies. A worldview that cannot account for mind, meaning, or moral obligation, moral truth cannot claim to explain reality. It merely describes its shadow. To say science explains everything is like saying a ruler explains why length exists. Declaring God unnecessary misunderstands what God is meant to explain. You cannot argue for truth, reducing thought to biology. Thoughts can be infinitely oriented, and biology is a limited perspective. Saying morality is subjective, then genocide is not wrong, just disliked. Justice is preference, not obligation. Human rights are social inventions. Yet physicalism condemns evil, demands justice, and invokes human dignity. They live morally as if God exists, while arguing as if God does not exist. A truly oxymoron, a contradictory philosophy that does not correlate to what makes any sense, with flaws and decoherency, an aberrantly anomalous deviant mindset, synthesizing meaningless agendas that persist on a rather groundless doctrine, pushing to earn credit where the credit is not due. Here I try to state how the upper crust of physicalist atheists, the late Professor Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins, are unreasonably, so unduly attest to the non-existence of God. First, we must note that what is absent to us is not invalidated. Second, what seems vacant to us is the mother of all things. It is impregnated with all there is and whatever will be. In his final book, A Brief Answer to the Brief Question, Professor Hawkins answers to, "Is there a God?" He says, "I think the universe was spontaneously created out of nothing, according to the laws of science, and the laws of nature are fixed. What role is there for a God? For clarity, spontaneously means automatically, not planned. A strict set of laws, rules for Professor Hawkins and like-minded scientists, cosmologists, and theoretical physicists, together with the combined laws of gravity, quantum physics, the laws of constants, and a few other laws, could explain everything that has happened or will occur in our known universe. Bear in mind that Professor Hawkins was a vocal champion of the Big Bang. The universe began by exploding out of an ultra-dense singularity smaller than tinier atoms, a pinprick dot. From this speck emerged all the matter, energy, and the space the universe would ever contain, and all that raw material evolved into the cosmos we perceive today. With the universe running on a scientific autopilot, the only role for an all-powerful deity might be setting the universe's initial conditions so that those laws could take the shape of a divine creator who caused the Big Bang, the big hit, then steps back to behold this work. Please note that the professor suggests that the only role for an all-powerful deity might be setting the universe's initial condition so that laws could take the shape of a divine creator who caused the Big Bang. Noticing a vital point that the professor, in his view, does not deny God, since he points to an initiator deity setting the universe's initial condition, which contradicts other suggestions he makes referencing God and existence. Professor Hawkins' explanation begins with quantum mechanics, which explains how subatomic particles behave. In quantum studies, it is common to observe subatomic particles such as protons and electrons appear, persist for a while, and then disappear entirely. Because the universe was once the size of an atomic particle, it is plausible that it behaved similarly during the Big Bang. The universe itself, in all its mind-boggling vastness and complexity, could have popped into existence without violating the known laws of nature. Still, cannot explain the probability that God created the proton-sized singularity, then flipped the quantum mechanical switch that permitted it to boom and bust. He then points out the physics of the black holes, collapsed stars so dense that nothing can escape their pull, including light. Like the universe before the Big Bang, the black holes condensed into a singularity. In this ultra-packed point of mass, gravity is so strong that it distorts time, light, and space. Simply put, in the depths of a black hole, time does not exist. What happened before the Big Bang? Hawkins said, "We have finally found something that does not need a cause because there is no time to exist." He said, "The role played by time at the beginning of the universe is, I believe, the final key to removing the need for a grand designer and revealing how the universe created itself. Time itself must come to a stop. You cannot get to a time before the Big Bang because there was no time before the Big Bang." One should remember that Professor Hawkins talks about 14.5 billion years ago as if it occurred yesterday, or as if it were a year or a few thousand years ago. He makes it sound like a theoretical fact, not just one of many hypothetical assessments. Professor additionally says, "It's like asking for direction to the edge of the earth. The earth is a sphere. It does not have an edge, so looking for it is futile." So when people ask me if God created the universe, I tell them the question itself makes no sense, because the professor believed there was no time to create the universe. Michio Kaku, an American theoretical physicist, futurist, and scientist, says we need a theory that goes beyond the Big Bang, and that string theory. String theory says that perhaps two universes collide to create our universe, or maybe our universe is butted from another universe, leaving an umbilical cord. Well, the umbilical cord is called a wormhole. Scientists believe the universe began with every speck of its energy jammed into a very tiny point that exploded with unimaginable force, creating matter and propelling it outward, forming billions of galaxies in our vast universe. Astrophysicists dubbed this titanic explosion the Big Bang, which occurred about 13.8 to 14.5 billion years ago, thus considering the universe's age. Bear in mind that the scientists say every speck of its energy is jammed into a very tiny point, exploding with unimaginable force, creating matter, and not the other way around, not the accumulation of matter bursting, making energy. It is no-brainer that the mind is energy-driven. Knowing a reason rather than value is responsible for this inconceivable, ineffable, unbelievable creation. Understanding that energy in physics is the capacity to do work is essential. It may exist in potential, kinetic, thermal, electrical, chemical, nuclear, motion, sound, radiant, elastic, and gravitational forms. As for Professor Hawking's analogy of God, he believed that the universe is running on a scientifically guided autopilot, and that the only role for an all-powerful deity might be to set off the Big Bang. The Big Bang hit, then he stepped back to behold his work. Therefore, he initially does not deny that God set off the Big Bang. It seems that timeless does not exist in the professor's lexicon, since he does not realize it. That the grand designer, as he puts it, is timeless. Professor Hawkins says, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been lowered by even one part in 100,000 million, it would have recollapsed before it reached its present size. On the other hand, if it had been greater by a part in a million, the universe would have expanded too rapidly for stars and planets to form. Ironically, what the professor utters is a clear testimony to decisiveness, absolute precision, excellent planning, and infinitely intelligent design, and powerful management and supervision. Incredible order, magnificent objectivity and purpose, which apparently, evidently, are not included in Professor Hawkins' dictionary. He says, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been lower, even by one part in 100,000 million and million, it would have collapsed before it reached its present size. On the other hand, if it had been greater by a part in a million, the universe would have expanded not rapidly enough for the stars and planets to form. To believe that such a monumentally oriented act is without a programmer, a stunning architect, or an astounding creator, an immaculate assembler, is likely to cover one's eyes and say one has stopped the sun from shining, and holding one's feet, saying one has prevented the galaxies from moving away from us and halted the universe from expanding, or holding tight, bracing yourself, saying I resisted the pulls from the black holes, or saying I jumped in midair, suspended without any attachment, resisting gravity's pull. One can dream what one wants or desires, but reality sings a different song that must be analyzed through critical thinking with utmost reason. The professor attributes the cause of existence to nothingness, where no cause or time existed. Then, abracadabra, boom, suddenly primordial, earliest, aboriginal, the first or primeval appeared, which should remind one of a miracle. But miracles are also God's attributes. Think about it and meditate on it with an abstract view, reflectively, intelligently, manner of grasping if any of that should make sense, unless it occurs in another world, another domain different from ours, where cause and effect are not applicable, since things can come out of nothing, like in the quantum domain, the invisible realm. In our domain, believing existence comes out of nowhere, with no cause, no space, no time, no motion, and without a promulgator, no creator. Accepting that things can pop out can happen on a scale as big as making the entire universe and the cosmos possible, and then for some, linking it to a bounded, local, destructible, unintelligent, unstable, and dull matter should send anyone for a psychiatric evaluation, at least in our modern industrialized world. But alarmingly enough, unwarranted thoughts can become norms and eventually the law. The Big Bang is now a dominant scientific fact, where prominent scientists claim there were no activities before the Big Bang, meaning no matter, no motion, no time, no space existed, just a void that apparently deceives the naked eye. Remember that motion, action, time, and freedom go hand in hand. In other words, they are attached at the hips and behave simultaneously. One without the other is not probable. Professor and affiliates do not suggest that not understanding nothingness is limited to our nervous system or to the language used to define it. Not realizing our mind does not accurately diagnose the invisible realm, the unseen world, which by nature we are bound to see nothingness, including the late Professor Hawking. But reason still questions whether the Big Bang emerged from nowhere. If yes, then that is a miracle. Think about it. No matter, no motion, no action, no space, no time, or any case or energy-driven entity ever existed before the Big Bang. To accept this is to believe that cause and effect, as we know it in our physical world, was not in existence then. Not realizing that a prime mover in our analyses can go forever unless a prime mover for all moves is indisputably manifested, is resourcefully credited. Suppose we do not accept an all-powerful God as a reason behind the sudden occurrence of the Big Bang. In that case, we need to consider the gradual movement of a steady transition, the accumulation of energy and matter, and the arrival of a high degree of lava and heat surpassing the threshold that potentiated the singularity with unimaginable force, triggering a colossal explosion that became a turning point in causing the Big Bang. Of course, a host of other viable premises is required for this to happen. Any explosion, wildly the Big Bang, causes disorder and chaos, unlike the fabulously orderly nature and majestically disciplined universe. Any explosion brings ruin and destruction, rather than an utter buildup and a creatively pleasing domain. I am not hesitant to say that the gradual buildup of energy, matter, and the sharp concentration of molten, liquid fluid melted by heat, lava, explosive materials, and gases is more favorable and better attuned to the scientific community than an enormous eruption occurring out of nowhere, which must have before, rather than seeing the Big Bang as the original requirement for the massive explosion. Either that or to realize that nothingness is saturated with beautiful ideas and things ready to be discovered. We should not go remiss, lax thoughtless, in saying that void or nothingness is exhausted of wonders. It should mean that what is already employed must have existed in the opening, hole, and the vacuum before innovation and exploitation. Besides, the nothingness that the professor refers to as the void is, in contrast, filled with quantum fluctuation, in which everything in existence comes. It will in the future, since the void is saturated with subatomic particles coming in and out of existence, as heavy-duty telescopes and technological instruments reveal an awesome unveiling of the unseen apparatus by the naked eye, fluctuating in and out of existence. Professor Hawkins, Richard Dawkins, and affiliates should know better that the physicists, the scientists, the inventors are the gynecologists delivering beautiful innovation, miraculous revelations, gorgeous transformations, and metamorphoses from the womb of Mother Nature, referencing nothingness, because neither science nor the scientists make universal laws. They only discover and produce them for a better living, in which they must comply with the correct assessment of the planted knowledge and seeded knowledge in the belly of nature. In his book, The Grand Design, he says, the universe created itself out of nothing, being obsessed with black holes, his specialty, in which the gravity is so strong that it can devour everything, including stars, space, and time. He finally believes that gravity is the cause of existence, contradicting himself, saying that the universe came out of nothing, not noticing that gravity is something rather than nothing. The concern should gravitate towards two possibilities. Existence came from nothing or something. The right question should be addressed as, is nothingness impregnated, filled with many things? If not, then the quintillion scientific innovations and unimaginable findings divulged by scientists and progressively applied should be considered fiction and nothing more. The truth is that all scientific inquiries, information, and knowledge were driven from the womb of nothingness. The invisible world, the unseen realm that gives birth, conveys the unknown until human curiosity, dreams, and imagination, the might and intention, perseverance and persistence, intelligence and will play as a gynecologist delivering them. The atheist should know there is nothing as the nothingness in the book of life and the encyclopedia of existence. Professor Hawkins forgets that laws of physics explain processes, not why there are laws in the universe in the first place. He claims because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing, but laws are descriptive, not agents. The so-called nothing in physics is still something: quantum fields, laws, potentials. Even if gravity or quantum mechanics explain cosmic expansion, why do these laws exist at all? He does not get it that the universe is exquisitely designed and brilliantly fine-tuned. Stephen Hawking did not disprove God, he dismissed a misunderstanding of God. His equations describe how the universe behaves once it exists, but they never explain why anything exists at all, not getting it. If the universe were not beautifully designed, orderly, and highly disciplined, his equations describing it would have been impossible. To claim that the laws of physics created the universe is to confuse description with causation. Laws do not act, choose, or create. By redefining nothing as something governed by laws, the professor avoided the ultimate question and answered it rather than answering it. Science explains mechanism. God addresses existence itself. The question Hawkins left untouched is the most fundamental of all. Why are there laws, reason, and reality in the first place? A single idea. Like the butterfly's wing, it can reshape an entire worldview. When Stephen Hawking suggested that the universe created itself because laws like gravity exist, the ripple was enormous, not because the claim was proven, but because it sounded final. Yet this is where knowledge quietly overstepped its own boundary. Laws do not cause reality, they describe it. A description cannot give birth to what it represents. To say the universe arose from nothing, governed by laws, is to smuggle something into nothing and call it science. This is the butterfly of knowledge. When a small philosophical error flaps unnoticed inside brilliant mathematics, it can generate a storm, a hurricane of misplaced certainty. Hawking did not eliminate God. He replaced God with the law of gravity and called it the question settled. Like many of its professors, such as Darwin, Marx, he did not answer why the laws exist at all or why reason can discover them. Science maps the universe with astonishing precision, yet it never explains why there is a universe to map. Denying God here is not a scientific conclusion. It is a metaphysical assumption disguised as physics. And no matter how famous assumptions are, they do not describe facts. Ladies and gentlemen, the professor told us the universe created itself because laws like gravity exist. The world applauded, not because the question was solved, but because it sounded like closure. Yet, listen carefully. Laws do not create anything. Laws describe what happened after something exists. A gravity did not wake up one morning and decide to invent a universe. This is where knowledge becomes dangerous. Not when it is wrong, but when it is incomplete and confident. A small philosophical slip hidden inside brilliant mathematics produces an avalanche, a massive ripple. That is the butterfly effect of knowledge. When we confuse description with creation, we mistake equations for causes and silence the most critical question of all. Why something rather than nothing? Knowledge, like a butterfly, moves quietly. One unnoticed assumption can alter an entire intellectual climate. When the universe is said to create itself, language becomes illusion, and certainty becomes theater. Laws are not parents, they are patterns. They do not breathe existence into reality. They merely trace its behavior. To deny God by appealing to physics is not discovery. It is a substitution. The mystery is not removed, it is renamed. Nothing governed by laws is nothing. And an explanation that presupposes existence never explains existence itself. Science gives us maps of reality, stunning in detail and beauty, but no map explains why there is land beneath it. The silence at the origin remains. In that silence, the question of God is not dismissed, it is waiting. Because when explanation explains everything except existence, they have explained nothing. Calling physics creation is poetry, not philosophy. Science answers many things. Existence is not one of them. Explain how the universe works is not the same as explaining why it exists. Laws do not create the universe. Lawgivers don't emerge from the equation, specifically God. May the good God bless you. As for Richard Dawkins saying science shows there is no God, is like saying microscope has proved justice does not exist. It is a misuse of the scientific method. Dawkins assumes only what can be empirically measured is real, that everything can ultimately be explained by blind physical processes, another in vain physicalist. These assumptions cannot themselves be proven by science. They are beliefs, not discoveries. His atheism is therefore faith-based, not evidence-based. If human minds are the result of unguided evolutionary survival, then our thoughts are selected for survival, not for the truth. Rationality becomes an accident, yet Dawkins trusts reason absolutely to deny God. He uses reason to argue for a worldview that undermines the reliability of reason itself, a point raised by philosophers like Alvin Plantinga. Dawkins appealed to evolution to explain complexity, but evolution does not explain why laws of physics exist, why mathematics describes reality. Why is reason able to discover laws of the universe? Why consciousness, meaning, and moral obligation exist? He explains the mechanism while ignoring the foundations. Dawkins often critiques a caricature of God, such as a sky being, a complex object inside the universe, or a rival to science. Classical theists Aquinas, Augustine, Aristotle, Ibn Sina, Ibn Arabi believed God is being itself, not a being. the ground of existence, not a hypothesis within it. He rejects God on the very premises he denies, like reason, morality, and truth that his worldview struggles to explain. He mixes how and why, like why moral obligation feels binding rather than optional. Why mathematics governs reality. That God, he indicates, is not inside the universe, but the reason the universe is a universe. He does not liberate the mind. It inherits a house by belief, then denies that the architect existed. God is not absent because science advanced. God is lacking because the door was locked before the search began. Dawkins does not get it that meaning cannot survive without a source. The reason cannot float without a foundation. Morality cannot command without authority. He is hallucinating, believing there is no absolute evil, no real good, no morality, or moral ought, only preferences. Notion as such can only remind one of a schizophrenic episode, loss of touch with reality, illusional attitude, a real hallucination of the mind. Agnostics. At its core, agnosticism is about knowledge, not belief. An agnostic typically says, I do not know whether God exists. The existence of God is unknown, or the non-existence of God is possibly unknowable. There is insufficient evidence to make a definite claim either way. They present themselves as a middle ground between theism and atheism. Agnostics demand scientific or empirical proof for questions that belong to metaphysics, not laboratory science. Many truths we live by, such as love, morality, sacrifice, logic, consciousness, awareness, and so on, are not empirically provable, yet are rationally affirmed. One lives as if God exists or as if God does not exist. Neutrality is practically impossible. It struggles to explain meaning, morality, and purpose, not knowing where it stands. An agnostic's reflection on the deep meaning of consciousness, awareness, and the unseen inner agent is practically irrelevant. Saying God is unknowable assumes knowledge about the limits of reality and reason. Critics argue this is self-contradictory unless one can justify how that limit is known. I emphasize that the atheists under different shapes and forms try to make sense of the world. They try to reason their way out of a dead end to no avail since the very entity. The same means they are trying to reason with. That is, their mind, their thoughts, is utterly not seen. They are invisible, not to exclude their feelings and emotional appeal. Then so unjustly, so unduly keep saying, where is God? Show God to me. Not realizing that the traces, the footprint of God are prevalent. They are everywhere. It only takes an awakened mind and open eyes to see them, as we can notice the effects of our mind and the result of our thoughts. The non-believers refuse to grasp its well-informed nature, intelligent universe, and highly attentive environment. No AI, no advanced language models, no smartphone, no smart TV, no GPS, no computer vision, no robotics, no automation, no quantum computing, no biotechnology, no genetic engineering, no microchips, no nanotechnology, no ultrasound, no MRI, no CAT scan, no EEG, electroencephalogram, to record brain's electrical activities, EKG/ECG, electrocardiogram for heart. No bioprinters, no internet, no satellite technology or mega constellation, no telescopes, no antibiotics or penicillin, no medical breakthroughs at all, no ultrawave, no space technology, and thousands of other brilliant products wouldn't have existed. They are made of subatomic particles, the underlying structure and the fundamentals of existence, telling us it is a super sensitive, superconductive, never insulated atmosphere. It is a highly delicate, tactful, thoughtful domain. This consciously witnessed realm must be paid attention to, making the impression that what goes around comes around, indicating very valid karma.
This has been Lopsided Minds, a production of Envoy of Lights. The journey continues in Part 6, The Silent Blueprint.